I'm Ellen Kushner. He put it up on his shoulder in the folds of his hood, and there it rode. Sometimes during the day, it jumped down and darted off into the woods, but it always came back to him, once with a wood mouse it had caught. He laughed and told it to eat the mouse, for he was fasting, this night being the festival of sun return. So he came in the wet dusk past Roke Knoll, and saw bright ware-lights playing in the rain over the roofs of the great house, and he entered there, and was welcomed by his masters and companions in the firelit hall. It was like a homecoming to Ged, who had no home to which he could ever return. He was happy to see so many faces he knew, and happiest to see Vetch come forward to greet him with a wide smile on his dark face. He had missed his friend this year more than he knew. Vetch had been made sorcerer this fall, and was apprentice no more, but that set no barrier between them. They fell to talking at once, and it seemed to Ged that he said more to Vetch in that first hour than he had said during the whole long year at the isolate tower. The otak still rode on his shoulder, nestling in the fold of his hood, as they sat at dinner at long tables set up for the festival in the hearth hall. Vetch marveled at the little creature, and once put his hand up to stroke it, but the otak snapped its sharp teeth at him. He laughed. "They say, Sparrowhawk, that a man favored by a wild beast is a man to whom the old powers of stone and spring will speak in human voice. They say Gontish wizards often keep familiars," said Jasper, who sat on the other side of Vetch. "Our Lord Nemerla has his raven. Our Lord Nemerla has his raven, and songs say the Red Mage of Arc led a wild boar on a gold chain. But I never heard of any sorcerer keeping a rat in his hood." At that they all laughed, and Ged laughed with them. It was a merry night, and he was joyful to be there in the warmth and merriment, keeping festival with his companions. But like all Jasper ever said to him, the jest set his teeth on edge. That night, the Lord of O was a guest of the school, himself a sorcerer of renown. He had been a pupil of the Archmage, and returned sometimes to Roke for the winter festival, or the long dance in summer. With him was his lady, slender and young, bright as new copper, her black hair crowned with opals. It was seldom that any woman sat in the halls of the great house, and some of the old masters looked at her sidelong, disapproving. But the young men looked at her with all their eyes. "For such a one," said Vetch to Ged, "I could work vast enchantments." He sighed and laughed. "She's only a woman," Ged replied. "The Princess Elfaran was only a woman," said Vetch, "and for her sake all Endland was laid waste, and the hero mage of Havnor died, and the island Solea sank beneath the sea." "Old tales," says Ged. But then he too began to look at the Lady of O, wondering if indeed this was such mortal beauty as the old tales told of. The master chanter had sung the deed of the young king, and all together had sung the winter carol. Now, when there was a little pause before they all rose from the tables, Jasper got up and went to the table nearest the hearth, where the Archmage and the guests and masters sat, and he spoke to the Lady of O. Jasper was no longer a boy, but a young man, tall and comely, with his cloak clasped at the neck with silver, for he also had been made sorcerer this year, and the silver clasp was the token of it. The lady smiled at what he said, and the opals shone in her black hair radiant. Then, the masters nodding benign consent, Jasper worked an illusion charm for her. A white tree he made spring up from the stone floor. Its branches touched the high roof beams of the hall, and on every twig of every branch a golden apple shone, each a sun, for it was the year tree. A bird flew among the branches suddenly, all white with a tail like a fall of snow, and the golden apples dimming turned to seeds, each one a drop of crystal. These, falling from the tree with a sound like rain, all at once there came a sweet fragrance, while the tree, swaying, put forth leaves of rosy fire and white flowers like stars. So the illusion faded. The Lady of O cried out with pleasure and bent her shining head to the young sorcerer in praise of his mastery. "Come with us, live with us in Otokne, can you not, my lord?" she asked, childlike, of her stern husband. But Jasper said only, "When I have learned skills worthy of my masters here, and worthy of your praise, my lady, then I will gladly come and serve you ever gladly." So he pleased all there, except Ged. Ged joined his voice to the praises, but not his heart. "I could have done better," he said to himself in bitter envy, and all the joy of the evening was darkened for him after that. Chapter 4, The Loosing of the Shadow. That spring, Ged saw little of either Vetch or Jasper, for they, being sorcerers, studied now with the master patterner in the secrecy of the imminent grove, where no prentice might set foot. Ged stayed in the great house, working with the masters at all the skills practiced by sorcerers, those who work magic but carry no staff, wind-bringing, weather-working, finding and binding, and the arts of spellsmiths and spellwrights, tellers, chanters, heal-alls, and herbalists. At night, alone in his sleeping cell, a little ball of wear-light burning above the book in place of lamp or candle, he studied the further runes and the runes of Ea, which are used in the great spells. All these crafts came easy to him, and it was rumored among the students that this master or that had said that the Gontish lad was the quickest student that ever had been at Roke, and tales grew up concerning the Otak, which was said to be a disguised spirit who whispered wisdom in Ged's ear, and it was even said that the Archmage's raven had hailed Ged at his arrival as Archmage to be. Whether or not they believed such stories, and whether or not they liked Ged, most of his companions admired him and were eager to follow him when the rare wild mood came over him, and he joined them to lead their games on the lengthening evenings of spring. But for the most part, it was all work and pride and temper, and held himself apart. Among them all, Vetch being absent, he had no friend, and never knew he wanted one. He was 15, very young to learn any of the high arts of wizard or mage, those who carry the staff, but he was so quick to learn all the arts of illusion that the master changer, himself a young man, soon began to teach him apart from the others and to tell him about the true spells of shaping. He explained how, if a thing is really to be changed into another thing, it must be renamed for as long as the spell lasts, and he told how this affects the names and natures of things surrounding the transformed thing. He spoke of the perils of changing, above all when the wizard transforms his own shape, and thus is liable to be caught in his own spell. Little by little, drawn on by the boy's sureness of understanding, the young master began to do more than merely tell him of these mysteries. He taught him first one, and then another of the great spells of change, and he gave him the book of shaping to study. This he did without knowledge of the Archmage, and unwisely, yet he meant no harm. Ged worked also with the master summoner now, but that master was a stern man, aged and hardened by the deep and somber wizardry he taught. He dealt with no illusion, only true magic, the summoning of such energies as light and heat, and the force that draws the magnet, and those forces men perceive as weight, form, color, sound, real powers drawn from the immense, fathomless energies of the universe, which no man's spells or uses could exhaust or unbalance. The weather workers and sea masters calling upon wind and water were crafts already known to his pupils, But it was he who showed them why the true wizard uses such spells only at need, since to summon up such earthly forces is to change the earth of which they are a part. Rain on Roke, maybe drought in Oskill, he said, and a calm in the east reach, maybe storm and ruin in the west, unless you know what you are about. As for the calling of real things and living people, and the raising up of spirits of the dead, and the invocations of the unseen, those spells which are the height of the summoner's art and the mage's power, those he scarcely spoke of to them. Once or twice Ged tried to lead him to talk a little of such mysteries, but the master was silent, looking at him long and grimly, till Ged grew uneasy and said no more. Sometimes, indeed, he was uneasy, working even such lesser spells as the summoner taught him. There were certain runes on certain pages of the lore book that seemed familiar to him, though he did not remember in what book he had ever seen them before. There were certain phrases that must be said in spells of summoning that he did not like to say. They made him think, for an instant, of shadows in a dark room, of a shut door and shadows reaching out to him from the corner by the door. Hastily, he put such thoughts or memories aside and went on. These moments of fear and darkness, he said to himself, were the shadows merely of his ignorance. The more he learned, the less he would have to fear, until finally, in his full power as a wizard, he needed fear nothing in the world, nothing at all.